Hi, it's Maya here, this time with my May wrap-up. In May I read 6 books, so this shouldn't be as long as my April wrap-up. And thankfully the books that I read in May I enjoyed more than those I read in April. The first book that I finished in May was the most recent book from Ursula Vernon writing under T. Kingfisher, so this is The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. And these are part of her fairy tale retellings, and this retells the Snow Queen. So I really enjoy the fairy tale The Snow Queen. I think most of that comes from the Finnish movie from the 80s, which I saw as a kid a couple of times, and I just went to see it last year when it was shown in an archival theatre, so I sort of know how the story goes. So the book tells of Gerta, whose neighbour and childhood friend Kay is taken by the Snow Queen one winter night, and Gerta leaves to save Kay. And the story follows from there, going through the plot points that you might know from the fairy tale, but of course with Vernon's own twist. I've known the fairy tale with the name of the boy being Kai, but that might be the Finnish version. My favourite character in this story is, funnily enough, Gerta's grandmother, who isn't even in the story for that long, but she's just so great. Right at the beginning, Gerta mentions not being like other girls, and the grandmother's reaction to that is so good. In this very town, said her grandmother, there are at least a dozen girls standing at windows right this very minute saying the exact same thing. I did the same thing when I was your age. I dare say I wasn't like other girls harder than anyone else ever was. I was so unlike other girls that I wasn't even like myself except on Sundays. There are also some mentions of Finnish folk tales and mythology in this one, and it made me wonder if it takes place in Finland. It might, even though there are also mentions of Norwegian and Swedish mythology, but Gerta's grandmother has told her about Ukko, who is the main god in the Finnish mythology, and also there were mention of the tonttu, which are these brownies or house elves. It was funny because I read this book quite close to reading Uprooted in April, and both of those had Finnish words in them, so that was nice. I now read all of T. Kingfisher's fairy tale books and that are out currently, and this one might be my favorite, even though it's quite hard to decide. I gave them all 4 stars. I really enjoyed them all, and I recommend you go check them out if you like fairy tale retellings. It also has a lesbian relationship, so. Then I read a book that I'd been really looking forward to because I had heard nothing but good things about it, and that is The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. I have read 3 books from Jemisin before. I read the Dreamblood duology and then the first book in her Inheritance trilogy, and I plan to read the other 2 quite soon. So N.K. Jemisin has her own writing style that perhaps can take a while to get into. At least I remember that it took me a while to get into The Killing Moon, which was the first book that I read from Jemisin, but now that I read The 5th Season, I got into it immediately, and I've really grown to like that style. The 5th Season is so far my favorite of the books that I've read from her. I also really like The 100,000 Kingdoms, the first book of the Inheritance trilogy, which I know a lot of people don't like that much. It was her debut novel, and I like the first book in the Dreamblood series, but not the second book that much. So far, I liked almost all the books that I read from Jemisin, and The 5th Season was my favorite, which of course makes sense because it is the most recent one of her books, so of course it makes sense that she'd have only gotten better as she went. So The 5th Season takes place in a world where quite bad natural disasters happen, well, quite often. Whenever a natural disaster strikes that really changes the whole world and how things work, it is called the 5th season. In this book, one of the 5th seasons is just starting, a particularly bad one. So this book has 3 major storylines from the point of view of 3 women. There is a young girl who has this power that is both feared and also used in this world. So the people who have this power, which allows them to manipulate the earth. So regular people fear these people, they drive them out, they often try to kill them if they find them, but this power is also used in this world. There's this one organization that gathers kids who know these powers and grows them up and also breeds them together to use these powers to the benefit of the world, paying very close attention to the individuals and not letting them do what they want. So the first character, the little girl, is someone who has this power, and she is taken into this school of the Fulcrum, which is the organization. And then there's also this woman who has been part of the Fulcrum for a while now and is sent on a mission to this coastal town to help mold the land there. And then there's a third woman who has just lost her kid and is going after her husband and her other kid who have left her. And this particular point of view is told from the second person. And I actually thought that this choice would throw me a bit, but it actually didn't. I seem to slide into it quite easily. So as I said, it's written in the second person as you, because the character herself calls herself you, because she's not sure who she is after what she's gone through. So it was quite easy to read once I decided that I'm reading her thoughts, and that's how she addresses herself currently. I really enjoyed this book. I like the characters and I like the plot and I like the world, so it seems that I like pretty much everything about it, and I'm really looking forward to the second book. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Next I read The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black, and this is one of her modern fairy books, so it has some fairy mythology and young characters. The Darkest Part of the Forest sadly didn't do that much for me. I remember that I quite liked Tithe, which is the first book, but it's been ages since I read them, and I've liked other books that I read from Holly Black, so I was really expecting to like this one too, but it felt a bit samey to what I remember from Tithe. For some reason this felt a bit too familiar and I didn't really get into it. So there were some scenes that I liked, especially this one with people crying in a school, and at one point I really thought that the main character Hazel should have read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because she made a really bad mistake with fairies that she wouldn't have done if she had read the book. But of course that's just a silly connection that my mind made. So this story tells of Hazel and her brother Ben, who live in this town called Fairfold, where the people who live there know that there are fairies around. And there's also this one boy, fairy boy, lying in a glass coffin, and he has been lying there for as long as anyone can remember. I gave this one 2.5 or 3 stars. As I said, it felt a bit familiar and I wanted a bit more. Perhaps if I was in another kind of mood I would have enjoyed it more, but I honestly can't tell. Next I picked up Fortune's Pawn by Rachel Bach, which is the first book in the Paradox trilogy, and I have all the books because I found them for cheap at bookstore sale. And I've seen them around and I had heard that they are quite fun, easy to read science fiction romances. And I tried this first one out when I did the first chapters tag, and I really found it quite easy to read and it felt like something that I wanted to read at the time. So this is a story of Devi, who is a mercenary who hires herself on this one ship that has the reputation of really getting into a lot of trouble. And Devi has really a lot of ambition and she wants to make it into their sort of King's Guard on her planet. And she hears that since this particular ship gets into a lot of trouble, 1 year on the ship sort of counts as 5 years working anywhere else. So she decides to jumpstart her career and go work on this ship. This is basically good times in power armor, and there's also a romance. I like the first half, possibly a bit more than the second half, which focuses more on the romance, but all in all this was a fun read. Weirdly, I like that Devi is very nationalistic, which is not something that I really can connect with myself, but it's such an unusual trait in a main character, I think. She worships their planet's god king and views all planets, not her home planet, basically as backwaters, and I really like this character flaw of hers. This aspect of her personality doesn't make her a great person perhaps, but it makes for great characterization. I gave this one 3 stars on Goodreads. It's more of a 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed it and I'm going to read the next 2 when I feel like something quick and easy and fun. The next book that I read was Poison by Sarah Pinborough, and this is quite a short novel that is a retelling of Snow White, and it's quite a twisted and erotic retelling. This is part of a loose series by Sarah Pinborough called Tales of the Kingdom, which are all fairy tale retellings. And I really liked how a lot of different fairy tales were briefly mentioned in this one. For example, there were allusions to Hansel and Gretel and Sleeping Beauty. Off the top of my head, these 2 are the ones that I remember. I know that there's a book about Sleeping Beauty, and the brief mention of it in Poison made me interested in reading that story. I don't have much to say about this book. It was a fine read, and I'm always interested in fairy tale retellings. I gave 3 stars, and I'm going to check out the rest of them. And the final book that I read in May was actually a writing guide. It's called 2K to 10K, Writing Faster, Writing Better, and Writing More of What You Love by Rachel Aaron, who is the person who wrote this one, Rachel Bach being her pen name under which she writes science fiction. And this book was very cheap for the Kindle, which is why I bought it. I was really interested in her writing process, and I used to write when I was in high school, but I really have fallen out of it, so I don't do it anymore that much, sadly, but I'm still interested in writers' processes a lot. And I can't claim to be that knowledgeable about writing guides, but this was an interesting book and enjoyable to read. It was also extra relevant for me in May because I had just read this and she had just finished writing this book before she wrote the writing guide. There are a lot of examples from the writing process of Fortune Spawn in the book. For example, I learned that she wrote the first draft of Fortune Spawn in 12 days. So I did give it a star rating on Goodreads. I gave it 4 stars because I really enjoyed reading it. But as I said, I don't claim to know how it works as a writing guide or when viewed with other writing guides. So those were all the books that I read in May. Now I also read some comics, but I'm going to do a separate wrap-up of those along with the comics that I read in April. So look forward to that one, and for now I'll say bye.